Hello.
Hi, just going through a mail.
Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. So we'll see who joins today. Mostly we have your composition service as a topic.
Yeah. So from my side, we have updated the use cases with the new proposal with Redfish Composition Service APIs, and I also listed the dependent APIs from other resources. And
Oh, very good, very good. I haven't checked that out. So that means we can. Do you want to go through them and then we can take them to the MTF, perhaps some of them, right?
yeah,
Composition service pending. Okay, so where did you stick this?
I edited that the same content.
Okay, okay.
I can share 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we stick with the current composition service APIs because the other new things with additional APIs is now being worked out. So we start with this one, and then once and when that is released, we can integrate those APIs. Basically, the composition service exposes the APIs: resource blocks, resource zones, and the core composition service API. And it needs support from other resources, like especially when we do a system composition, we need to have the system resource, have to have the system collection, has to have the post call and option to add resource block and remove resource block, and finally a system instance need to have the delete action for the cleaning up the composition resources. So
So when you say we stick with the old APIs, uh, are they going to stay the same? Do we know, or because I want to, if we want to approach the MTF, we should probably, because what they are talking about now is obviously not the old APIs.
yeah, there are additional API active pools and reserved pools kind of additional APIs. I don't think so. There is a change in the resource block or resource zones.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Okay.
I don't think that they, I mean, typically all schemas are backwards compatible, so I don't think it'll be an issue
Hmm.
as it stands, right?
yeah,
Visually,
Yeah.
our plan is like instead of waiting to DMTF to release the newer schemas, we can start with with that one. Maybe first phase we'll provide this solution. As and when DMTF releases, we can accommodate those things in the upcoming phases, like phase 2, phase 3, something like that.
Yeah.
So that means with the first composition service will not have any support for things like network and fabrics and
Active pools and other things, yeah.
No, but then the even the updated one though, Jonas, doesn't have fabrics in it.
Okay.
So what does that mean, Martin? Then why do we have a composition workforce?
Well, because it was led by Dell, and they had their own objectives for the areas that they wanted to add. So they were looking at multi-tenancy and
No, but we called this out. We had DMTF over. We talked to them, right? And we
yeah,
wanted to also add connectivity to composition. Otherwise, it's useless, right?
yeah.
So now it's useless.
Well, no, it's not useless. According to them, what they wanted to do was finish extending the service with the base stuff that they've got, and then we can add the fabric stuff in once they've got to the end of this. So that'll be
But
the next.
in major use cases in the industry, right? You can't you're not down basically you're doing composition without being able to set up connectivity between hosts.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's useless to me.
No.
I mean, we can call what we want, right? Perhaps we find a better word because it's a little harsh, not as flexible. Whatever we call it, we cannot set up connectivity between hosts.
No, I know. There's additional use cases that we want to get supported by the composition service in addition to what they have.
Yeah. Sorry, Muthu, it doesn't.
No,
It was just a reaction. It's not your fault that they didn't rest. So please
yeah,
carry on. Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, regarding the like use cases apart from the API support, the use cases like the main challenge here is to accommodate how to build the resource blocks. That's what we are being discussing for the first like couple of weeks. And we identified like 3 different possible options. I just listed down like use case 1, 2, 3 based on my understanding. And the first option could be adding a like a post API to post action to add a resource block, no matter what the underlying service. But right now, DMTF resource block resource does not support any like adding a new resource blocks. It has to be internally like identified.
Yeah, but
And,
we can change that, right? So
yeah.
just because they don't do it, and this was explained, I think, in the meeting we had, if there's a concrete use case where we need to be able to add new resource blocks, then so be it. And I see a couple of use cases there.
Yeah.
One has to do with dynamic discovery of composed infrastructure, right? You know,
Yeah.
nobody's gonna sit there and painfully add the content of a rack by hand, right?
Yeah.
So to me, any kind of automation we do would entail at least being able to discover the disaggregated components and then be able to discover how they've been composed and then add them in. So to me, there's really a case for extending the APIs.
Yeah, that's what we are suggesting from the first option. So we can add, even the MTF is not having, we can add a kind of extension or like enhance the resource blocks to add a API. That is the first use case. The second use case is like build the composition resources automatically. This requires some kind of, we are adding some intelligence into the composition service backend. So as and when a new server is added to the ODIM, the composition service will get notified, or composition service do some monitoring on the underlying ODIM resources. Then based on the data available on the like new resource added, suppose I'm adding a new computer system. So I'll just check and I'll collect all the new resource information, and internally the composition service itself will automatically build the composition resources like resource blocks and resource zones.
Yeah,
I don't understand what you mean by that. Are you talking about?
We have when we have the event service, and I'm bringing this up because it doesn't really mean that the spec has to change, because you will get resource created for everything that is added, right?
Yeah.
And so we could have a composition service that would indeed subscribe to those messages and make sure that we have the correct resource block and what have you.
Yeah, I guess I guess I'm still a little hazy on what we're talking about. So there are two kinds of servers, let's put them that way, or computer systems that you can have, right? One is the generic pre-assembled or pre-composed pre-assembled computer systems, vanilla, Dell, HPE, whatever servers, right?
Yeah.
The other one would need to be composed based on intent, and the specification of the intent is what's defined in the composition API, right?
Yeah.
And then the results of that intent are defined in the resource blocks, right? But ultimately, you want to manage composed and static systems, or whatever you want to call them, the same way.
Yeah,
but we're not. But Alex, what he's talking about though is exposing the the composition service learning about the resources in the first place, right? The resource blocks. So otherwise, no northbound client can actually do anything with the composition service unless the composition service knows about the resource blocks.
But who would discover who would build the resource blocks in the first place?
But that's what we're talking about here, though, these first two use cases, right? The first one is the northbound API would populate the composition service with the resource blocks, which would be a manual process.
Yeah.
The second one is actually every time that a resource is added to ODIM, then there is a notification that the composition service could subscribe to. And when it's, through that subscription, it could learn about the resources being added and automatically create the resource blocks for them, right? So, tell me, guys.
But you would only create resource blocks for composed infrastructure, right?
Well, you haven't composed anything yet. You're just creating the resource blocks, right? And then those resource blocks would be part of a resource zone, and you would, you could then compose those resources, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I understand what you're saying. So you're basically saying that the components themselves, the disaggregated components, could be discovered, they could be added or discovered by another service, and then the composition service knows what's where based on the event notification.
Yeah, it would know about it, and then you could do something with it.
Yeah, we need to be careful because in DMTF, resources are complex things. They have resource elements a lot of times, right? And
yeah, resource instance or resource.
Yeah, but to me, a computer system is a resource, right?
Yeah.
Disaggregated memory module is a resource element. If you look at how they define their taxonomy or their glossary, that's what it looks like.
No, there is no such thing as a resource element, right?
Resource element is something that DMTF created eons ago, right? And what they talked about was a computer system being composed of compute, storage, network, and software resource elements. That was a classic DMTF definition of a computer system.
If you could, just so I can read up, if you could point me to that at one point, Alex.
Yeah. Cool. It's part of SIM, the SIM model.
But from our perspective, though, we now need to make a call as to, because I'm thinking about it. This use case 1 and use case 2, even if we went to the DMTF and got them to change resource blocks so that they can be essentially read-write, you can add them from a northbound client. We could still implement use case 2 and have an automated way of adding them, and then you would have both options.
Yes, and you don't even have to go to DMTF. Well, eventually you do. But for use case 1, nothing is stopping us from adding another API call, which they don't have for now.
No, it does. In use case 1, we would have to have that approved by the DMTF. right?
Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
if we
to make it like DMTF like redfish compliance, we may need to take it to DMTF. Adding
Well, so this is
API.
where we need to talk about that, right? So DMTF compliance means that we comply with the API definitions in the redfish spec.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
may be APIs outside of redfish that have been defined as well. And yes, they will upstream them into redfish if possible.
Kind of OEM extension, something like that.
Well, not let's not go there. That's a
Okay.
scary thing, OEM extensions. But you know, there's nothing to stop us from creating a post request, right? To go and compose a new resource or create a new resource block. It's not defined in the spec, but whatever is defined in the spec, we would be compliant with. Now, the trouble we get into is if somebody adds a post request in DMTF in the redfish specification, then we would have a conflict. So yes, we should upstream it, but we can prototype it, we can see how it would work, and then we can give them a concrete, you know, proposal for what it should look like.
Yeah, in the use case number 2, there is a kind of limitation or challenge in building the resource zones. For example, there is a computer system resource discovered. We really know that the underlying components like processors, memory, and network interfaces within the computer system, so that we can build the resource blocks and create a resource zone, add it to a resource zone. But if there are resources like disaggregated resources like external storage discovered, we really do not have. We need to really identify the like option or intelligence to how we can add that resource blocks into a specific resource zone that can be composed, something like that. That part it's kind of challenging for us.
No, I get that. Do you think that this could be a sort of split issue though, right? In the way that we solve it, in terms of if we implement there is, you know, use case 2, so we so the composition service automatically, you know, as the resources are added and ODIM learns about them, right?
Yeah.
Then those would be pulled into the composition service as resource blocks. The resource zone piece in terms of the actual groupings of those resources, so that you're right, you know, you make sure that you have shared storage along with the compute nodes and maybe the fabric, right, all as part of the same zone, so they can all communicate with each other. Hang on, just let me finish, please. Hang on. Yeah. Could that that sort of the zone piece actually be a northbound client function, right, in terms of it specifying the actual, you know, it can learn about the resource blocks now, right? Because those have been learned by the composition service, and a northbound client would have the intelligence to know which ones were, you know, part of the same zones, right? You know, would need to be grouped into the same zone.
Same zone, yeah.
Would that make sense, do you think, or what do you think? Or is that just mad and we should have the whole thing sort of auto-discovered?
From my understanding, as long as like the northbound API supports, we have additional like enhancement, like anytime a resource block can be added to a resource zone. Resource zone supports patch operation and all. That's the one possible option, but ultimate aim here is to automatically identify. We have to add that intelligence. That's the best solution. But with the current resource information, we need to learn on that area.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering if, you know, we have the unmanaged rack plugin, right?
Yeah.
So the unmanaged rack plugin would have the collection of, you know, chassis, which essentially shows you all of the resources that are inside a rack, you know, so the compute, the storage, the top of rack switching. So there is a grouping, right, within ODIM of common resources within a rack. I just wonder if there's a way of being able to.
Martin?
Yeah.
Can I make an alternative suggestion?
Go on then.
I think it's along the lines of what you just said, but maybe not as automated, and that's okay, because I think these groupings of resource blocks are really going to be system administrator specified. They're going to decide what groupings they want. It's not necessarily bound by a rack or a chassis.
Yeah.
So what if we added APIs to create, to do
That's
to
exactly
create,
what.
to do CRUD on resource zones. And then when you specify a resource block, you have to specify which zone it goes into.
But even a resource block itself is going to be hard to understand what it is, because so here I am the composition service. I see there is a new server added, so that creates a lot of resources, and I'm receiving resource created events from event service. Well, so one server from vendor A from 2020 might have to go in as a full-blown resource block, because it cannot be split up, right? Everything is on the same motherboard, and then
Well,
another server from vendor B 2024 can go in, and then you can take the one CPU and a bunch of memory modules and assign to one resource block, and the other CPU can be assigned to its own because of advances in technology and things of that nature. How do we know the difference?
well, so if you look at the model, right, there is a notion of a computer system in the model. And that
Really?
computer system can have
Yeah.
flavors. It could either be composed or whatever. So that's one
No.
thing.
No,
Second
I
thing,
didn't get that at all. I mean, if it's composed, it's already known as a resource block and a resource zone, and then somebody has done something.
okay, but there are multiple composition scenarios, right? I can
Well,
have a
I
bunch
guess
of,
what I'm saying, before composition, that we have to define the resource block. So that's where I'm seeing the challenge.
you don't need to define the resource blocks for statically assembled systems.
But
So
we talk about the composition here, right? So from composition perspective, the computer system is of type composed, and the resource blocks, this is one-to-one to the hardware, let's say, endpoints that are enumerated, right, or crawl on the
Yeah.
hardware. But the problem is that the resource zones itself, the notion should come from the hardware based on topology, and not be tweaked by the the DC admin.
But hold on. So what is a resource block? Isn't that the smallest thing you can use for a composition exercise?
Yeah, resource block is a
Okay. So
let's say.
Okay,
Yeah, I just want to say that this is the abstraction for any endpoint, any hardware entity.
No, but I'm saying, if I have something like a blade system or something, or if I have a Superdome or something, I could divide that up into smaller resource block, allowing some northbound entity to use them in different composition exercises, right? So the challenge will be in that scenario to look at any hardware that has been mapped into resources in Redfish and understand if this device that has 8 CPUs and so much memory is something that can be broken apart. I mean, if the vendor gives me the resource block up front, then I understand it. But for the composition service to look at it, how would you make that automatic?
Well, I mean, here's how, right? So
Yeah.
you have a southbound interface, you have a discovery interface going to the BMC, let's say, right? One way to do it is, whenever BMC is aware that, there's a system change or somebody adds something, you can always interrogate the BMC and get the mappings, right? Not the resource zones. I mean, yes, not the resource zones, because I think those are going to be very arbitrary and they're logical. They're not really bound to the physical topology. They're bound to the logical topology. But you can at least get everything that's sitting inside the Superdome by talking to a service processor and saying, hey, can you tell me about your system? That will get you a physical topology. The logical topology is another thing, right? I guess, the bigger question is, how do you see compositions or aggregations of these components being managed? If they can only be managed through a composition service, then you need management APIs for them. You need to basically support CRUD. We support CRUD for all the elements of the data model, right? You know, for all the information elements. And then you basically have a hierarchy, right? Which is what DMTF defines. So before you could say that a resource belongs to a zone has to be created. Right? No one's going to be able to dynamically determine something logical that comes from a mind of a sysadmin.
No, perhaps I'm missing something. Is there something in the model that indicates then what is the smallest thing that can be composed? I mean,
This is
if
research block.
yes, and that's that's the one thing we are
Okay.
created automatically, right?
Mm.
In
But
use
you
case
can-
2.
Yeah, but guys, they're different composition. I mean, okay, so for the crude composition that we have today, where we're essentially not really composing, but just connecting a compute resource like a system or a server to a bunch of storage or a bunch of network fabrics. That's one thing we need to be able to do. But if you look at the classic definition of CDI, right, composable disaggregated infrastructure, the granularity could be quite granular, right? I could even partition off cores if I wanted to. So I think we need to look at, I mean, what I would suggest we do is we actually look at the definition of the data model or the information model, look at it in UML. I'm sure they have it. And then we will be able to see all the relationships between everything, and it should become obvious how we handle this.
I think
Well,
we
that
have the main
seems-
problem of that we need to model the zones, right? We need to model the zones, what can be connected to what could be aggregated together. And this is, hardware won't support it fully, as we know. Hardware can model the blocks possibly, but zones, it all depends on complexity of specific fabric, interconnectivity and other things. But thinking that the DC admin we will just provide the control API, the CRUD, as you mentioned, Alex, and the DC admin will take care of this. I think it may be too much for the DC admin to manage.
Are you kidding me? How, I mean, so you look at any kind of, look at SDDC on VMware. Who defines what resources go into resource pools? An admin. Nothing is magically determined because it's impossible. Same thing here. I mean, all we're really talking about is composition on a physical level.
Yeah, Alex, but I'm just thinking about, some sophisticated cases. Let's say you have full disaggregation of the CPUs and memory on the platforms.
Yes.
And the admin would need to possess such a knowledge, oh, for this platform from vendor X, I can disaggregate. On this platform from vendor Z, I cannot.
Yeah, that's.
I'm just saying this is lots of information.
Yeah. Maybe I'm not being very clear. So for cases where you have very fine-grained disaggregation inside the box, the physical box, the inventory of components of these disaggregated components, right, or these disaggregated pieces, is something that you should be able to get through an API call to the BMC.
Which means that the ideal state, the BMC should have the, let's say, notion of the resource blocks, and we see that some vendors already implemented.
Well, what it should do
but
is
also,
have,
but also zones, which means like
should, well, but zones. I mean, but you can span a zone, as I understand it, can span multiple.
Yes. But I mean,
racks,
in the platform
cavities.
centric view, what I mean
Yeah.
is, this is a hint on the platform level, zone connectivity, right? And of course, the DC admin will add another dimension.
Well, what I'm saying is that, if I have two racks with composable pieces that are all, eligible to be composed together, because, these racks are connected and everything is fine, right? Let's say that could certainly be a case in the future. You add a whole bunch of XPUs in one rack, you add a bunch of, persistent memory in another, you add another rack full of SSDs. Now you're going to compose all of that stuff together. And if you need more SSDs, well, you would add another rack. But it would still be the same resource zone. That's what I'm saying. That's the use case you have to handle. That's the toughest. And what I'm saying is that the BMC will never know that that's the case. So there will have to be some manual or a priori grouping by a data center administrator or a platform administrator to determine, what goes where. They may say that this entire rack goes into a resource zone, but there's got to be some interface to be able to specify it. And if you have that interface from a DC admin perspective, then you might as well add the API calls to Redfish. So I create a zone. It's stored somewhere in ODIM, right? It's persisted, and then there's already a way to model it, and then you can add pieces into it dynamically.
So Rafael, I think what you're right in that the vendor itself will know. So when he exposes this new server, his BMC would basically have the computer system and the resource blocks ready. So we can look at those, and then but
I think before vendors start supporting this, we need to have a plan B.
Well, the easiest thing is to enable somebody to enter this information in, and how easy or hard you want
the control interface. And I think the DMTF guys already stated the same, Alex, and they were even probably willing to change the rules for the collection of the resource zones to make it,
yes,
postable.
What I'm saying is that, they didn't think about the most important part. How does the whole thing come into existence? And we need to tell them how to do it. Or suggest. I'm not saying tell, but, at least we should have that conversation.
So what is missing today, if we just think back, is the creation of new resource blocks?
I don't think the discovery API today makes a distinction between disaggregated pieces that are being put into a rack versus complete systems. Okay. It also doesn't make.
Ideally, we could make ODIM smart to, let's say, create the resource blocks for discovered endpoints during the discovery process, and let the DC admin to just post the resource zone information.
We could, yeah. I mean, I think again, we need to. I wonder if there's a. We're going to do a quick search. I wonder if there's an actual model.
Rafael, are you aware of any commercial systems that have implemented this kind of resource blocks at the hardware level?
Don't quote me on this, but I've seen the, let's say, x86. I guess it was from Lenovo, based on the resource blocks in the BMC. But let me check. I will, send email to the TSC if I find it.
Yeah.
Can somebody just clarify what is the discovery API we're talking about?
The crawling the hardware. This is what I'm calling discovery. We need, when someone does the post on the ODIM Norbound, right, to let's say insert a new system, the ODIM is crawling it or getting the generic Redfish drivers is getting the information from the hardware, and this is the point in the flow that we could add this, generations of the resource blocks for the corresponding hardware.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not official API, but it's more like this is how ODIM is handling when there is a new manager introduced on the aggregation service.
Yeah, no, but this API is already part of DMTF, right? Resource blocks are there already.
Yeah.
No. Alex mentioned a discovery API. I was just trying to figure out what it was, but I understand.
Okay. Yeah.
So what we need here, I mean, so the thing with the resource blocks though is that if you get a new server and you look at the resources, you don't, unless there is a vendor's defined set of resource blocks, how would you know how to group them into resource blocks, Rafael? That's impossible, isn't it?
Yeah.
How to group in resource zones, you mean? Because the resource block is just elementary piece of hardware. So you could assume that every new endpoint, computer system, chassis, network interface card, these all are resource blocks, and you create those blocks for composition
No.
service to be used.
No, but they belong to the same resource block. If it's a rack mount server from today, right?
No, but the resource block itself, it's not a server. It is on the more granular level. It can be, memory.
How granular can it be? If
it could be piece of memory. I can have a Optane memory would be a resource block, right?
The problem is that the specification doesn't specify how granular it is, so it's all whatever.
I cannot. We don't have a server that will allow you to use a single memory module, Alex. If you guys are aware of vendors that have that, unless it's some super.
No, Jonas. But the model itself assumes that you will enumerate all the hardware as a resource blocks, and then you create the resource, or the resource zones should be created, and the resource zones will show what should be pulled with what, right? And this is where you can specify whether something can be pulled or not.
So then the resource block is not the smallest composable piece.
Well, from a composition perspective, it is. The resource blocks can be arbitrarily complex or arbitrarily simple. But the whole point is that from a composition point of view, if they're really coarse grained, which is all we're capable of doing today, the best you can do is attach NVMe drives to a server, or attach, a fabric attached FPGA or whatever, right? You're not gonna do much more than that, but that's not where it's gonna stop.
But Jonas, let's suppose we follow your model. Every server is a resource block. Then on such a high level, what we can do with regards to the pooling?
Yeah, Rafael, you are right. Regarding the resource blocks, even you can define a computer system as a resource block. There are types: compute type resource block, and their computer system as one resource block. Or we can, inside a computer system, processor, memory, all the resources, we can define different resource blocks. That based on the Redfish model. But what is the meaning if you are within one computer system, there are 5, 6, 8 memory modules and some 2 network interfaces available and 2 processors available. Defining multiple resource blocks, that's it really helpful for us.
Ultimately, they're going to the same resource blocks.
Yeah,
right? That's
either way is possible based on the Redfish model. We can define the entire computer system as one resource block, or we can define individual resource blocks and put it under one zone, something like that.
Well, you can't arbitrarily decide. You have to follow the schema, right?
Yeah,
that's what we need to do, is find the schema. Then everything will fall into place. I'm looking for it now.
But Alex, as we talk, the schema doesn't dictate you how what level of abstraction you want to achieve. As we said, the resource block may be.
But the schema defines associations between things, right?
Yeah. So you create the blocks and you associate each block with each physical, endpoint. This is the, let's say, first level of association. Then you pooling, or you're creating the zones, which tells you what resource blocks with associated hardware, of course, can be pulled together. And then there was a question whether it's worthwhile to model every DIM, every NIC. For some things, it will be probably overhead. Like if you cannot disaggregate DIMs as of now, but I can imagine that pulling NICs or pulling the NVMe, partitions, or NVMe, the full drives with NVMe over Fabric.
How can you use a NIC from one server?
It's not a server.
That guy is sitting on a PCIe bus hooked up to a freaking CPU. You need to use the whole server.
Yeah, we need to use the whole server.
You can have a PCIe switch, right? And let's say target that is supporting multiple NICs, and you pulling over PCIe.
Guys, everyone in the world is moving to a model where these memory compute, storage, and network elements are connected over a fabric. So you can have your NIC connected to a fabric, connected to another component.
Absolutely.
but,
Right.
But when a server is added that does a compute like CPU, processor, memory, everything, in that case, we need to just to define one resource blocks, right?
Yeah.
exactly.
Computer system resource block. Then if there is
Boom.
any fabric or storage that is there, and we are going to combine that storage and fabric resources and to a zone based on like whether they fall into those resource blocks fall into the same zone or not, based on the hardware connectivity. For example, I have a computer system and I want to attach a storage drives for that one. Then I do not know like whether it is possible or not, depending on the interconnected hardware interconnectivity and all. So if they are, then they will be like falling into the same resource zone, like the computer system and the fabric, the switch that is connected to the fabrics can fall into the same zone. That's what my understanding is.
Yeah, I mean, you can if you have a storage device that is put up by a computer system, and that thing is serving out shared storage, then you can carve out volumes for that, and those volumes can be in separate resource blocks because they are composable. That's
Yes.
something that can be
Yeah.
used.
Yeah.
But that,
Yeah,
I
so
understand that, but it's hard to discover it, and it's also difficult. Like if a vendor is selling the server that you will install this software that builds up the shared storage on, the BMC will not be able to expose that, right?
Expose that exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if
but
the
usually if you come up with the storage server, it will in most cases host the, let's say, Redfish service inbound as well, to, let's say, achieve the connectivity over NVMe over Fabric or other cases. And then you have BMC, which is, let's quote unquote say dummy, or doesn't have all the information. But from the storage perspective, the storage has to create the volumes for NVMe over Fabric, for example, and it has to make it available to the initiators, so he can as well expose the resource blocks associated.
Yeah, so I think the use case, so we need to be able to create our own resource blocks here, right?
Yeah.
It's not something that in every case will come from the vendor from scratch, because we might use
Yes.
the vendor's equipment to host some new type of services that will become new resource blocks.
Can
So
provide APIs to actually create their own APIs for the resource blocks and zones, or we can automate it. That's what our idea is, right, Muthu?
Yes.
The automate to a certain level, like we can't without knowing the interconnectivity of hardware, we can't actually automate the creating resource zones process. But resource blocks process we can automate to certain level. Like if a computer system is actually discovered, then we can actually keep it as a resource block of type computer system. If a storage device is actually being discovered, then we are going to keep it as a storage type resource block. And how they are like the administrator or whoever uses that one, they can create a zone if they fall into the same they are connected, and they can fall into a same zone and used for a composition service. That's what
That's what, like, we are building the resource blocks we are adding the intelligence to build the resource blocks, but allow the wherever possible we will merge it into the add it to a resource zone. If it is not possible, we have to have a resource zone API to add the resource blocks into the zones. Yeah, that's
how would you? I
suggestion.
mean, yeah, I think we should start simple, to be honest.
Yeah.
Let's start by saying we have zones, we have resource blocks inside them, and we know how to compose something based on specification of intent.
Yeah.
That's the core functionality of a composition service. Then you make an assumption that, at least to start with, not perfect, but at least to start with, in release 0 of the composition service, somebody will have to externally add all these mappings in. Okay.
Yeah.
You can create an API for this, and because you're going to need to anyway, because clients won't know how to do it any other way. And now your persistent model has the resource blocks defined and has resource zones that are essentially collections of those, right?
Exactly.
That's it. Then you figure out what you can do dynamically.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that the notion of a resource zone is a logical notion. It's not something physical today. Today, tomorrow it may be, but today it's not.
It's not physical. Yeah.
And so the only thing you can discover is physical hardware. And for each one of those things, you need to build a resource block. And then somebody has to say, these 10, they go into a resource zone A, and these 20 go to resource zone B. That's a manual process today until you get to completely fully disaggregated automated systems where you can do it, dynamically through a fabric.
Yeah.
Then you should something in that system that has something inside that box that knows how to partition itself into systems logically. Whatever the control interface to it would imagine would need to be able to say, I have 10 resource zones and I have the following resource blocks in each one. Here you go. Here's the information. Now you can give me marching orders on how to compose things.
Yeah. I think that could be the right approach for us. First, add start the development and add the basic functionalities. Then add more intelligence based on the specification evolves and the ODIM evolves.
Absolutely, crawl, walk, run approach. Yeah, but I am cautious. I am cautious on oversimplifying. If we just assume that a server is a resource block, then this is not scalable, and this is not future
I'm
proof.
reflecting how it is today. If I hook up even a Dell server or a HPE server, you will see that you can't use them for anything but the whole server. But I think it doesn't really matter, because the discussion we're having is sort of highlighting that we need to be able to create resource blocks, either dynamically or automatically by having an intelligent composition service that can detect these things, or later if somebody is installing something. We talked about the shared storage use case, for instance, where all of a sudden a service is hosting shared storage, and now we have resource blocks in the form of volumes and other things, right? So we need to be able to create resource blocks. So that's clear from this discussion.
Yes.
I don't think we disagree on that. I think we're all in violent agreement that we need to be able to add the API.
Yeah, but the other discussion it has less, even if it's an interesting one, and I think that there might be some misunderstanding on my part, but it's also something that might not need to call for a change to DMTF, is my conclusion for that. Because
I don't think we need to make all the changes. What I'm basically saying is you learn to walk, crawl, and run, or crawl, walk, and run, right? That's what you do. And table stakes is to be able to take an existing representation of resource blocks and an existing representation of resource zones and successfully build something in a constrained or static way based on what's there. That's the core common currency. Like if you do that, that's like 80% of the problem. Then there's the issue of how those things got there in the first place. And obviously there are two answers: manual input from somebody, an override capability from somebody, or it's dynamically discovered. I'm submitting to you that dynamic discovery at that level does not exist today.
No, but is that a requirement on DMTF, or do you think it's more like something we would build?
It is a requirement on DMTF. I mean, I can't name names or give you specific company names, but I'm certainly aware of efforts in the industry to build systems out of little piece parts.
Yeah, but Jonas is asking if this dynamic is, let's say, detection is requirement. So DMTF is,
you want to work at scale, it has to be dynamic.
Absolutely, but DMTF is not specifying. It's outside of their territory.
No, they have a discovery API. I'm staring at it. They do. It's there in the spec.
Alex, can you point us, please? Because the discovery is just crawling your hardware and getting, from
today,
the service
that's what it does.
All
but we need to extend it to do more. That's my point.
That's why I'm hesitant, because if we bring that in now, I think it's going to be something that they might reject.
Guys, we don't have to bring everything in at one time, but we can have a roadmap for what we want to, what use cases we want to handle where.
Yeah.
And what I'm suggesting is that for release 0 of the composition service, we simply focus on the northbound API extensions, plus the core functionality of being able to compose something in, you know, as defined by the spec, right? Based on those semantics. That's all.
So Alex, what this discovery API would do? How would it work?
So if you, so if I have a BMC, right, and if I, okay, so it would still require some level of setup, but the whole idea is that systems should be able to announce themselves when they're booted into existence. Okay. So whatever means
you're talking about the detection of the new hardware.
Exactly. Or changes
Yeah,
in the
so
configuration,
this is
or changes in the configuration of existing
absolutely, absolutely, and RSD was supporting this, and this is the
That's
right approach.
my point. You know, there are lots
you
of
should
things
be
we
able to
didn't-
discover
Yeah.
via network. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, you know, this has been done in a virtualized world. Now we need to do it in the physical world, right? So all I'm saying is that, you know, RSD did this in a proprietary way, but the need.
Well, RSD was using the SSDP protocol, right? If the hardware was supporting.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we
what
were
it
looking
said.
at the DHCP list table to let's say to get the list of IPs and then try to discover them.
But you know, a push model might be more appropriate. If I had a whole rack of systems and I flipped the power switch on and they all came into existence, they should all be able to notify, send an event on the management network that says new system here, right?
Yeah, this is like SSDP case, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. That's all it is. And if you look at the discovery product chapter, it's all about SSDP, right?
Yeah, and I think Redfish doesn't specify that very hard. They talk loosely about it, that you can use discovery.
Loosey-goosey about it. We need to tighten it, right? This is, I mean, look at how many conversations we're having because the spec is too generic. Here, chapter 13, section 13.4. Okay?
What are you talking?
In the spec, page 130, spec, I'm looking at version 1.12. Page 139, section 13.4. Automatic discovery of managed devices supporting Redfish may be accomplished by using a simple service discovery protocol. Okay?
Yep.
So now, what we need to do is, what are the limitations today? That's what we need to know. Like, and it's doing so by DNS naming schemes. Okay, great, fine. It's good enough for now.
The only problem that we would need to rework ODIM a little bit, because for now it's pushed by the, let's say, northbound API addition of the new services and the corresponding plugins, right? Because if you've got something new in your network, SSDP comes in, you fetch the hardware, but you need to, let's say, designate the right plugin to go talk to the hardware.
Right. Also, look at section 13.4.1, which says universal plug-and-play compatibility. That's ultimately what you have to support. I plug something inside the existing rack, everyone becomes aware of it.
Yeah, and our third use case is kind of like looking for a similar model, like when a server is added, if server exposes BMC exposes the composition service resources, for example, our AMI BMC exposes the internal composition service resources, resource blocks and resource zone. Our ODIM composition service can leverage that information and just add it to the collection, something like that.
Look at to that point, look at section 13.4.4, notify alive and shut down messages. And it basically says Redfish devices may implement additional UPnP defined SSDP messages to announce their availability and also allow end user to disable. I mean, basically that's what I'm talking about. It's here, it's already specified, but in a very generic way.
Yeah.
It's there. right? We're arguing over something that's already been thought through. What they didn't think through is all the next gen, use cases where things are much more loosely coupled than they are today. And granted, today everybody builds servers where the motherboard acts as the glue for everything. But that's not going to be the case tomorrow. I mean, you listen to Gartner, look at where the industry papers are. That's not what people want, right? So companies are going to change the way they build systems.
But can we drive this back to what we're asking DMTF? Because right,
Well,
because that's
so
ultimately what we need from this exercise.
so
Is it?
the first thing we need is the create API for a resource block.
Yeah.
Yes,
Today we have an add resource block on the computer system. I don't know that that is helpful.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like. And I think that means add something to a computer system, if I'm not mistaken, an existing one.
yeah. In RSD, there is attached detached resources. I think this is looks similar to that
Same thing, yeah.
API, but
Yeah.
it is. I don't know. It's just adds the resource block information into the computer system instance resource. Under the resource block collection, it will add the other entity from based on the mockup I understood.
Mm.
So
But we
by the
need to be.
way, the redfish specification may be concerned with a subset of what ODIM would have to be concerned with because it adds additional value. And it may be that, being able to create zones or delete zones or map resources into zones is something that we add value for. It doesn't have to be part of the redfish stack, which is focused on, very precise, specific APIs to control resources in bulk or as singletons, right? That's what redfish specifies. But the other parts could be have a different API route. It could be ODIM.
Yeah, but if we assume that we will do, let's say, automatically create the blocks within the ODIM, and it is possible, we talked about a couple of approaches, then we could only, for example, ask the MTF for allowing to post into the collection of the research zones.
Those blocks,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing I'm missing in this proposal from you guys, I think, because I want to be able to point the MTF to this. So we have the use cases, but what are we asking them, right? What is the delta? Is there a gap in the spec? What do we need in there?
I think the use cases we need to specify are not the use cases at this level that we're looking at now. I think the use cases need to be from a persona perspective, right?
Yeah, ODIM kind of like heterogeneous environment, it is talking to different resources, right?
Yeah. Let's assumption number one, we're gonna have servers or equipment from different vendors, right?
Yeah.
And that equipment can be pre-assembled or it can be disaggregated, meaning that my Mellanox GPU could be dynamically bound to I don't know, an Intel box. I mean, not an Intel box, but an Intel CPU and SSDs from Samsung and I don't know, Optane storage for persistent memory. So I have to be able to have a composed computer system that has piece parts from different vendors. That's one use case. Okay.
So because we only have less than 2 minutes left, and I need to jump, but is it so if there are more use cases, perhaps we can enhance it, but I also want to have a little section where we are outlining what we feel is needed in DMTF that is not there today, because that's of importance to the workforce or the work.
Yeah, maybe we can look at the list that Intel submitted months ago, and we can refine that list strike out things we don't feel as a group are important. But we made a list.
Yeah, do you have that list,
It's
Alan?
online. It's in the wiki.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah. But so you submitted it here to. I was thinking you talking about submitting something to DMTF. Sorry.
No, not yet. You know, we want to talk about it here.
But Muthu, is it possible to add what a section where you feel is missing in the spec as far as?
Yeah, sure, Jonas.
I'll point the guys to this right away, and perhaps we can get the discussion going. But it would be good also because we know that there are some stuff missing.
Well, pointing them to this, I think, well, you know, your mileage will vary. Having this discussion in the Redfish meeting would be better because there are other companies there that probably have, you know, similar feedback, but, you know, the way it works is only a few people in that meeting kind of run the show. And
Yeah.
the rest of the people are kind of quiet. But, you know, my experience is that when you mention a few things, all of a sudden other people start saying, other companies start saying, hey, yeah, we need that too. Hey, we want that too.
Yep. Yeah, I hear you. Sorry, guys. I have another meeting that has started that I need to be part of. Apologies. But I think we made a lot of good progress because we need to discuss these things for sure. So, okay.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, guys.